I've always said this to everybody, all the people who worked for me before, is that you have to kind of always try to feel comfortable being uncomfortable. What does that mean?
Today, Seb Sheppard has done both at Alpine F1, and before that he was at Renault, and he's led more than 150 engineers to design and deliver cars where milliseconds decide the outcome.
If you get on an airliner, which I'm sure everybody in this call has, and suddenly you see that the crew, especially the captain, are running up and down the corridor, you're not going to be particularly comfortable on that flight. And the person who's leading the team has to always show calm.
And before stepping into F1, he was at All-Train Group. Some people now know that as Capgemini, and he was reporting directly to the CEO, and he oversaw the integration of high-tech companies across Europe.
Is that there was in the middle of the test, the car goes up, something rather bad happens, and I'm looking around, and then I suddenly see 2 or 3 of the senior people go out. They congregate around the desk, 20 minutes, chat, no problem, okay, they'll go off for lunch, and that was it.
Which is not the easiest thing to do, I guess, but I guess that's why you say the role of the leader is not easy at all.
Never, no, it's not, no.
Welcome to Everyday Leadership, the podcast where we go beyond titles to explore the truth behind what it means to lead with intention, authenticity, and impact. And when we talk about leadership under pressure, I think there are very few arenas that test it more than Formula One or large-scale corporate transformations. And trust me, I'm speaking from experience. And my guest today, Seb Sheppard, has done both at Alpine F1, and before that he was at Renault, and he's led more than 150 engineers to design and deliver cars where milliseconds decide the outcome. And before stepping into F1, he was at All-Train Group. Some people now know that as Capgemini, and he was reporting directly to the CEO, and he oversaw the integration of high-tech companies across Europe, making sure strategy and culture work hand in hand. And we all know that is not easy to do at all. And today we're going to delve into some of that experience, from flying Sea King helicopters in the Royal Navy to shaping billion-pound businesses. What does it take to lead high-performing teams? Engineering teams are one of the most demanding sport on earth. Like, Sebastian has lived that at every level. So let's find out how he did it and how he thrived under pressure. Sebastian, welcome to Everyday Leadership.
Thank you very much for having me. Glad to be here.
It is an absolute pleasure. And I always like to go back with my guests just to understand a bit about what it was that got them to where they are now, what they're doing. And for you, for example, I know that you grew up in Chile. And I'm curious, like, with having like the Andes right outside your window, how did that environment kind of shape your imagination and what you saw possible, especially as a young, like 8-9-year-old child?
Yeah, hi. I mean, growing up in Chile was fantastic. Although when you grew up in an environment with mountains and gorgeous sort of nature and so on, you're not really quite you don't really quite acknowledge it until you kind of leave. And when I left, when I was the sort of late teens, and now I've come back over the years, you actually really appreciate the fact that you got the mountains right there, all the snow, and so I've literally just landed yesterday from having spent a month there, which is lovely. And I was like a born again child, really, because it was just in awe of the mountains and the snow, and my sister and my friends kept on saying that, what's wrong with you? Why are you so happy? It's like, why couldn't I be happy? Look at these mountains. And the lovely thing about it was that after I left school at 17, I spent a lot of time down in Patagonia, which, if you can imagine, it's just the most gorgeous, wild, spectacular place in the world, and all of that nature, that the power of that nature, the power of things, is so important. And as you say, you don't quite realize it until you sort of you go back to how much impact it's had on you. But it was lovely to grow up in, by the mountains. I was lucky enough that from my parents' garden, it's literally the mountains were right in front of you, just almost overlooking you all the time.
Well, you're an adventurous kid then. Like you like to get out, get involved in the wildness. She talks about going to Patagonia at 17. Again, not a typical teenage experience. Like being out in the outdoors. Sometimes people talk about it breeds a lot of curiosity. I'm curious, was that the same for you?
Yeah, yeah. Obviously, in those days, we didn't have mobile phones, so it's like a bicycle and or either a bicycle or a black and white TV set. And I didn't like TV anyway, so I used to sort of roam around Santiago on my bicycle, and and then in latter years, I got the chance to go down to on an international expedition to Patagonia that developed into about 2 years worth of helping develop this organization and the expeditions out there. So I got to travel quite a lot through Patagonia, and you fall in love with the place. I mean, it's wild, it's hard, it's it's just extremes of weather, but the nature is it's superb. It's just so out there, so far away from the comforts of everyday living, and the and it sort of tests everything that you have. Your survival skills, it teaches you a lot about you, and that's the most important thing that I learned is that it there's no escape. There's no way that you can just go back home and go jump in a comfy bed. It's like your wet sleeping bag, or that's it type thing. Um, and you come out of it without realizing that you've learned a lot more about you, the person, your strengths, your weaknesses. You acknowledge those more importantly, and you can work on them. And and it's a bit like in the military that I learned afterwards is that when you strip down all the creature comforts that you have, the real person comes out. And me and the other people that were in this thing, you people that you've never met in your life, within a week, you are like family because you've had to rely so much on each other, and because some people have weaknesses, some people have strengths, and those just become a big mass of people. A little bit about the subject that we're talking about, and I think that was the sort of the basis of some of the other things that became a little bit more day to day in my life.
What's your view on strengths and weaknesses in the frame of a lot of times people talk about focusing on strengths, knowing your weaknesses. Some people talk about knowing you need to double down on your weaknesses or get people to help you fill those gaps. I'm curious from your perspective, how do you look at strengths and weaknesses?
I mean, in teams, in groups of people, there will always be strengths and weaknesses. In individuals, it's important, I think, that you two things. One, that you know what they are, and you can work on the weaknesses, but just keep going on the strengths. But ultimately, in a team, you can't have everybody on with all the same strengths and the weaknesses being sort of uh, the same. But one thing that's quite important to me is that, and I've always said this to everybody, all the people who worked for me before, is that you have to kind of always try to feel comfortable being uncomfortable. What does that mean? Is that in life you'll first of all learn how to do something like when riding a bicycle. First of all, it's very wobbly, and then you become quite good and proficient at it, and then you feel comfortable. You can't feel comfortable riding a bike. It's the same with work, is that you eventually learn how to do the work that you need to do, but then at that point, you need to actually start thinking like, well, what's the next step? And by being comfortable, being uncomfortable means that you always have to look at doing something that makes you slightly uncomfortable, as in you're not quite sure how to do it. So you're always learning, relearning, and especially working on the weaknesses. When I was at school, I was very, very shy kid. I couldn't I couldn't stand in front of a classroom. Now I'm perfectly comfortable with it. Obviously you still get a little bit nervous, but you learn how to work on it. When I was in the Royal Navy, I was, strange enough, I was afraid of heights, which is not really compatible with flying helicopters. But I thought, I'm not going to let that, I'm not going to let that get in the way. So I sort of thought, right, shock therapy. And I went off and did a skydiving course. And what it taught me was that whilst I was addressing the weaknesses, and I was having quite a lot of fun doing it, but the things that it didn't, it made me still nervous being at heights, but I could control it. I was more comfortable in my weakness, and by that's kind of what I'm saying about comfortable being uncomfortable.
How did a shy kid at school end up going to Patagonia in the wilderness and leading, building like you described, to then going into the army to doing things like flying helicopters, even though you're scared of heights. There's something around facing your fears and pushing through. I know you talk about being uncomfortable, being comfortable, being uncomfortable, but there's still an innate, I need to do this, I need to push forward, I need to push through mentality that I'm hearing coming from you. And then just those early years, like, I'm curious, what was that thread that kept you, okay, I want to break through that barrier, I want to do this, I want to step into the Navy? Like, these are not things that people think about, but yet you kept on kind of moving through them.
It's interesting because I don't think it was an innate thing of mine to, always been pushing ahead, but it was certain doors would open, and in life doors will open, but also you have to go looking for those doors. In my case, there's this chance of going down to Patagonia, and I thought, well, it's either going to be 2.5 months on the beach, just not doing anything with that. I don't like beaches anyway. Or I can go down to Patagonia, which sounds like quite a lot of fun, and there's going to be lots of young people. And, when you're 17, 18, being surrounded by lots of young people your age, especially from abroad, sounds like a lot more fun than being on the beach. So I kind of, things happen, things open up, and then these whole experiences start happening. And then little by little, you start learning that, you're actually learning things, you are experiencing things that will be fundamental in your life. I was also sort of hearing a lot from the people from abroad, going like, this is amazing, what an amazing place. And you hear these comparisons from other parts of the world, which at the time I didn't know about. So you start realizing that this is actually quite a special thing. But to your point, I think it was the fact that I just got bored of being sort of shy and timid, and I thought, well, you know what, I'm just going to go out there and try everything and see what sticks. And if I can push it to a degree, and then have to pare back, then that's fine. But I'll see where it takes me. And I'd rather take a shot at the goal rather than not. I can't remember. I think it was one of the famous basketball players that said that you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. So,
Love that. What lessons did, I guess, being in the cockpit teach you about composure, about leadership, around decision making, that you have kind of taken with you throughout the multiple careers that you've then had since then?
Being in the cockpit, what we call crew resource management, is very important. It's called captaincy, and that means that you have to, first of all, know what you're doing. You have to have trust in the people who are your team, your crew, and the crew have to have trust in you. And it's the analogy I always make, certainly with managers and people I've worked with, is that if you get on an airliner, which I'm sure everybody in this call has, and suddenly you see that the crew, especially the captain, are running up and down the corridor of the aeroplane, sort of looking stressed and upset and screaming and shouting and uncontrolled. You're not going to be particularly comfortable on that flight, and probably a lot of people would get off that flight before it took off. So you have to have trust in the fact that the crew are ultimately professionals and that they're going to get you to the destination, because ultimately getting to a little metal tube and flying at 35,000 feet is, it's fairly safe in modern sort of conditions, but it's still something that's not comfortable from a human perspective. So ultimately, it's what you're learning is that that the person who's leading the team has to always show calm, has to be the person that's not the one that's stressing out and just running around and just sort of trying to look busy, but it's the person who has to project that calm, that authority, that belief in the team that things are going to happen, and that more important, that person is not the fountain of all knowledge, but they require their team to feed into them so that they, if necessary, have to take the decisions. And and I think it's an important point that, and again, something I do talk a lot to managers about is that um, if you are a manager, you're working for me, and I see you running around like a headless chicken, sort of trying to put out fires and looking busy because you think that being a busy manager makes you look good, then to me, you're not in control of the situation. But if you're a manager that delegates properly, empowers your team to do what they're supposed to be doing, because you've ultimately got intelligent people working for you, and they give you the answers or they solve the problems, and then you can calmly help and guide and push and encourage and motivate and so on, then things will work better. I mean, there are times when everybody has to be quite super busy, but it's as long as it's not just in a as long as it's not chaos, it's fine. As long as it's controlled, fast, decisive activity. And I think in F1, probably the typical sort of image is the pit stop. That's always a very, very well controlled, very fast thing. And it's the same with, F1 in the background. There's a lot of things going on, but there's ultimate trust in what's going on and the hierarchy and what's going on and the decisions are made. There's no finger pointing, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit more about later. But I think that's the lessons from the cockpit, really. The calm authority, the trust in what everybody's doing to make sure that you always get home safely.
How easy is that to teach other people to do when you have not had the kind of background that you have? Because I think naturally a lot of people, when things aren't going well, there's chaos around, they just react to it. Unless you've had a background like you had, where you're like, no, calm is what's needed to get some clarity in there. So how do you begin to teach other people who haven't had that kind of background to be able to do exactly what you just described? Because it is needed, and that is what's necessary, but it's not easy for most people to do naturally.
Yeah, I think it's something that's not an innate thing in people. I don't think the teaching, certainly in my experience, that managers sort of tend to get the job. They just get given the job and they get very little training if they do at all, and they don't get much in the way of practical training at it. But the way I say it is, again, is that there's some very easy things that you can do as a manager that will create good, loyal, high performance teams. One of them is when you get generally a person who's technical and then becomes a manager, they think that they suddenly absorb everybody's problems. Should be the other way around. When you become a manager, yes, you have the experience and you have the wisdom and you have all the scars from having made mistakes in the past. But ultimately, when somebody comes to you with a problem, first of all, ask them, reverse it and say, what would you do about this? Because there's a 90% chance that the person who comes to you with a problem has already got an idea of what the solution is. And if that person, because they will have been selected to be in that job and they're probably quite reasonably good at that job, or they've got lots of motivation and so on, they would have thought about it. So the question is, even if you know the answer, the question is, what would you do about that job or that problem? So there, what you're doing is several things. One of them is that first of all, you are immediately saying to the person with the problem, I believe that you have the capacity to be able to solve this. Secondly, you are giving the problem back to them. And by doing that, and you're actually helping develop that person, because what happens generally is that if say an engineer comes up to their manager and says, like, what do I do about this? And that person says, you need to do A, B, C, and D. Yeah, you're giving the solution, but you're not allowing them to work it out. If you allow that person to work it out, they absorb the problem, they believe in it, it's now theirs, it's their responsibility. It's not, I've been given an instruction, I'm now responsible for something. I don't have to just go through a series of hoops, and I need to go and solve this problem, and I don't want to let my boss or my team down. So therefore, they'll do a much better job of it, and then that person will go back to the leader, and they'll say, this is my thoughts. And then the leader can then say, like, well, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? What about this? What about that? And then slowly you'll come to the solution. But I think that's one very good aspect of that. And that also becomes that creates loyalty, that becomes trust, that becomes a sort of the manager not absorbing all the problems, which is one of the biggest sources of stress for leaders. And then it just then you manage it in a much better way. And in my experience, that is a very easy. It's a very counterintuitive thing for managers, especially young managers, because they think that they have to do everything. It's not. It's exactly not the case.
So it's around one, you're coaching them, but two, you're helping to build their critical thinking in other people. Therefore, you don't have to be the one carrying that load, because you get them to, rather than you thinking for them, you get them to think for themselves by asking the questions along the way, kind of thing, which is quite important.
Exactly.
And for someone who's led 100 plus like engineers, when I was reading that, I was like, that is a lot of people. I got me curious, like, how do you, if it's possible, I'm going to use the word balance, being both visible and personal without getting stretched too thin as well? Because even the way you just described it right now, for you to help your other managers walk through and understand this is what you need to do, this is how you need to approach things, don't take on other people's problems, that still takes a lot of time and effort. But when you got so many engineers as well that you're catering to, how do you get that balance between both and not also burn yourself out?
So availability and communications are the biggest thing, I think. There, what one thing that leadership seems to think is that everybody aspires to having that corner office. I despise offices. Yes, you have to have offices to have quiet conversations, but I despise offices. And so, one thing we did is that we used to have this sort of very old sort of layout of a big office, and you'd have little groups of areas where people used to work together. You used to have these kind of little partitions about sort of, I don't know, chest height, where you can look onto somebody, you can sort of have a conversation, but it's a little bit of a psychological barrier. So we completely gutted the whole place, and it needed gutting anyway because it's 30 years old and so on. And then what we did is that we put a completely open plan set of desks with two corridors down the middle, and the idea was that within you had areas, but nobody had a designated desk. And we did several things. One is that we allowed people to move around, and we encouraged that so that people could always not always be next to Fred and Jenny, but it was always to be in different areas. And if you wanted to, if for example for the week you had to go off and work with that department, you'd just book yourself a desk in that department and go and chat with them. But the other thing we used to do was that we used to we would make sure we understood the process of communication of the whole, in this case, in the design of the F1 cars, but it applies to aerospace, it applies to just about anything you want, is that if you can understand the actual communication paths of things, and you sit people next to each other. In our case, we put aerodynamics right down the middle of the office, and right next to each area of aerodynamics, we put the different teams, the composites team, the suspension team, mechanical, etc., etc. And literally, it was just, instead of having to write an email or pick up the phone or walk 2 minutes to go and talk to somebody, it was like, that's your mate over there who sits literally across the corridor. And what we did is that we to break those barriers even further, was that we got the heads of both teams, the aerodynamics and the engineering, from the same sort of area, if you want. And we said to them, right, fairly often, once a week or so, go and have a coffee, all of you together, and talk about the football, talk about the weather, go for a walk and chat to each other, because that's how teams start getting created and barriers get broken. And so what would have before happened in that, that guy from aerodynamics didn't tell me. Yeah, but they're only 2 minutes. But yeah, but they didn't tell me. They didn't email me. They didn't call me. They're too busy, whatever. It becomes, my mate didn't tell me. You don't want to let your mate down. So it's like, hey, by the way, Johnny, I'm working on this. It's coming to you next week. Or the other guy would be, hey, is that thing that you're going to give me, is it going to be ready for tomorrow? Yeah, it's going to be okay. So those tiny little bits of communication start happening. And suddenly all the noise that we used to have about, they didn't tell me, this didn't happen, all of that where normally you would have had to spend hours with a project manager trying to work out, have you done this, have you done that? Suddenly it just goes. Obviously, there's still a lot of stuff happening in the background, but a lot of that noise starts disappearing because people start working as joint teams. And the way to do it is, strange enough, is very cheap. It's coffee and a walk, a bit of lunch, and also the second part of this, as you know, which is it is such a powerful thing, and I so believe in it, is that everybody thinks that in order to have a meeting, because about 80% of meetings are between 2 or 3 people maximum, and instead of having little meetings, offices to have meetings, I used to say to people, no, go and grab a coffee and go around for a walk, because where we work, there's a lovely little nature park around there, and it's about 10-minute walk, and that's enough for 2 laps. That's a 20-minute meeting. And especially if you're having a one-to-one with people about work, about a bit of feedback, about something slightly not comfortable. If it's technical, obviously you need a meeting room. But if it's just a chat, doing something in nature absolutely helps de-stress people. You go out in nature, suddenly it's not a corporate environment, and people relax a bit more. You can have those conversations, and you can talk about slightly a little bit more difficult subjects, and people are more relaxed, and that helps a lot.
So I can see some of the threads from you growing up in Chile, going out, being in the wilderness, all those are kind of coming through, and you bringing that into these kind of worlds. And there's something that you said around basically restructuring the whole office, which is like 30-year-old. So you said that in my head, I was like, ooh. So I can imagine there have been some people who've been there for a very long time, and you've come into the F1 office and like, right, we're going to change things up. And there'll be people who'll be very resistant to that. There are people who are comfortable in their space, in their booth. That's what they know. The people around them, they've built that whole lifestyle around them, and you just completely change that. What sort of resistance did you face, if any, and how did you overcome it?
It's the old adage, when you ask a room of people who wants to change, everybody wants to change. Sorry, do we need change? Everybody wants to change. Who wants to change? Nobody wants to change. Exactly. So I mean, there's always resistance. I mean, in the initial conversation, it's like, yeah, but my desk is 1.90 meters wide, and I've got my pot plant and this and the desks that we were putting in were really fairly small, simple things. And the idea was that you couldn't put your pot plant, but if you had your little pot plant and your pictures and stuff, you had a little desk and you put it in a little tray, and you put it out, put your things out for the day or for the week or whatever, and then put it back into a little cupboard in the evening. But the idea is that people, until people realize the significance of the change and how much more collaborative it would be, they couldn't imagine it. And when they started seeing that, actually, no, I'm going to go and I need to go and work with that person over there, or we created little working groups to go and solve a particular problem, then you literally just book it up and then put them in that place. And then suddenly it was, oh, wow, I didn't realize that. It was so much easier working environment. I can talk to them instead of having to walk up to them and interrupt them, to chat to them. And little by little, you start getting people sort of just being comfortable. This whole area, the fact that the desks were smaller, nobody even mentioned it after that. As soon as they sat down, went, oh, my desk actually rises. Oh, that's quite handy. And little things like that. But also I think that what would also help was that we started working a lot with the well-being of the team, because 180 or 150, 180 odd people working together, especially in F1, which is people are very motivated and they'll work 25 hours a day if they could. So you have to be very careful that people, you look after people's well-being. So one thing that we did, which was quite successful, was that we created a well-being team. And instead, in most companies, this is done completely the wrong way, in that the boss of the company, the boss of the department or whatever said, right, we're going to have a well-being team. I'm going to be the chairman of the well-being team, and I'm going to be able to tell you what you need for your well-being. That's completely wrong. Absolutely completely wrong. So what we did is that I said, right, give me one volunteer, hopefully a young engineer from each one of the departments that works in our group. And I sat them down in a room. I said, right, you guys now are the well-being team. And I want you guys to go and often chat to all of your mates, take as long as you want, and then come back with ideas of what would make this a better working environment for you. Because you guys spend a lot of time working here, you're giving it all the time. And I want it to be comfortable. I want us to have an environment where we don't have burnout. If people are close to burnout, I want us to be able to recognize it as a family normally would, and say like, oh, that they're looking a little bit shaky. Let's pull them out from the front line a little bit. Get them, so instead of losing somebody for 6 months, you kind of bring them back from the front line a bit, look after them a bit until they're ready to go back. And all of that suddenly becomes various things. One is that they start coming back with ideas. Can we have something like, say, plants in the office? Makes it look a little bit greener. Every day it's a bit of nature. All of that. People like that. Yeah, absolutely, not a problem. Can we have TV screens where we can actually see some of the information, or even the live view of the garage during the practice runs on the weekend of the races, or just little communication or whatever. Down to what one thing that was quite interesting was that they would have a quarterly survey of mental health, and they would ask lots of questions about how are you feeling? Is your manager being, allowing you the freedom to do what you want? All sorts of questions around mental health. And that meant that we could track the mental health of the whole office and the well-being of the whole office. And then you started getting a few sort of early warning signs of something that wasn't right. And then when something like that would come, this group would come and tell me and the technical director what was wrong. And then we could actually do something about it before it became a problem. And that was actually quite powerful, because then that meant that the team itself were in charge of the well-being, and that again reinforces the whole motivation, happiness to be at work, comfort. I've got my friends around me. It's a little bit less stressful. So
I like that. And there's something powerful around the self-organization, but also it also creates that inclusion, whether rather than leaning into the hierarchy, like you said, around this person, I'm the boss and I know this. It's like, no, you are in this, you know this better than we do. What would it create? What would it mean? And then you listen. And there's something powerful around really empowering people in that way. And as you're saying that and going through different steps that you've taken, it got me thinking around the word high performance teams. You've obviously led transformation projects in the corporate space. You've then done it now at Renault and at Alpine as well, with massive teams. From your perspective, what does that word actually mean? Because it gets thrown around quite a lot. But I'm curious that how do you define what a high performance team is, and how would you know if you are either in one or if you are not in one?
yeah, no, you're right. High performance has been banded around a lot. I think high performance is normally associated with elite sports and elite things, not so much in business, but it's you can create high performance teams in business, and that's the whole purpose of not only this podcast, but probably the work that both of you and I do. Um, the high performance teams are teams of highly motivated, very capable people who are really have got an environment that they can do their best work with the trust in each other, that the final outcome will be as good a job as everybody could do with the team that they've created. That's that's a high performance team. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go off and be the absolute best or the best, but it means that you're a collection of very good people who can work together with total trust and what I would call psychological safety, which is a whole another sort of topic. But in that you're not doesn't matter the hierarchy of the person in that group, but they can without fear put their hand up, give the idea without being shot down or you're too junior to make a difference, but to be able to contribute as much as the person who's got the most seniority in that group. But ultimately, it's about trust and communication. Um, that's an interesting one because I've um I've met some very, very, very talented engineers. But if a talented engineer can't work as a team, there'll be a talented engineer, but there won't be a team player. And in a lot of cases, I've had to say no to people who are extremely talented because they like to be a one person band and they think that the world revolves around them. And that's when you're in a team, which in my case it is. You can't have just single sort of superstars that. So you have the I'd much rather have the person who hasn't gone to that sort of top tier university, but has spent their life or their childhood tinkering in the garage with a motorbike with their mum and dad, or sort of gone and done sort of lots of sport and worked in a team environment, and have had to kind of use their brain to resolve things and initiative and gone out there and do things because those people will be not only team players, but they will also try and solve problems before they become problems or as they become problems without having to, and also have relying on other people without then thinking that if I rely on other people, I'm not doing myself a favor because I'm trying to climb that corporate ladder. If you do a good job in a team, it will be seen. It will be obvious. And your promotion will not come from the fact that you're going to elbow somebody in the face and move up, because a good manager will be able to see that you did that. A good manager will be able to see that you've done a good job, that you work as a team, that you're potentially a good leader, and that's how you climb up the ladder. But yeah, I think it's not always about being like the person who gets 100% in every exam at university. You have to have that practical knowledge of it has to be much more than the theory, and sometimes just the just doing everyday sort of things and working as a team is what creates that magic.
Will now be very encouraging to people who are just even listening to this. What you said around it's not about perfection. And I've recently using this phrase around there's a difference between being a great test and going after greatness. And I always talk about the fact that if you're being a great test, that's very, very individual. And that's just all about me, me, me. But if you want to be like realist, that means you're working with people around you. And naturally that leads to you that being that. So there's a difference in both. And I think we live in a world where everyone's like, I want to be the best, I want to be the best. And I was like, yeah, you can be the best, but no one gets there by themselves. And learning how to work with people to help shape you. Yeah, you might see some people who might be front and center, but they have a massive team around them who are helping them become that. And they need to know how to work with them rather than just be so singular and individually focused, which I think is the mantra that definitely needs to change a lot more. But I'm curious, in your hiring, you just said as a leader, I'm constantly looking at people to be like, this person's doing a good job and therefore they get a reward. The flip side of that I've definitely seen a lot more is there are a lot of people who work hard, but they don't get the rewards for it because they're just working hard. Whereas there's a whole system around network and different bits and pieces that they need to do. So as a leader who's been in those spaces, how do you actually ensure that the right people do get rewarded and celebrated and acknowledged? But sometimes it's not even about promotion and more money, which is nice. And there are times it's just being acknowledged that I see what you're doing. How do you ensure that you do that? Are there things you've learned to be able to help you to kind of get the best out of your team in that way and recognize them?
Yeah, I mean that was a particular challenge that we faced when I first started. Is that they you know sometimes the it's the person who shouts the loudest, the person who's the most visible, person who's running around putting fires out, that sort of gets the attention of the manager. But in that case, the manager's not really paying attention, and we had to do something that was because we deal a lot in facts and figures when it comes to sort of yearly promotions and salaries and bonuses and stuff like that. You have to have a process by which you can reward people correctly, but also take in all sorts of factors. And first of all, it comes down to, are people being given the proper feedback? And do you have the proper feedback loops for people, not just the once a year annual review? Because a lot of times managers don't want to confront difficult situations, and the easiest way to deal with that, people, especially if somebody's quite forward about, I'm the best, you need to promote me, and the manager goes, "Ugh, yeah, okay, there you go," and they just bend on that. You have to be able to have a process by which you can capture not only all the good things that people have done, but all the development, help them develop, give them the opportunities, show that what they can do, and so on. Try and reach their potential. But then you have to be able to see the whole picture. First of all, so we created a thing like, right, for every person, we had a whole sort of business analytics thing which said, right, how much does this person earn? Where in the median of their peers are they? When was their last pay upgrade? When was the last bonus? How do they rank this year in their sort of feedback to in a 9x9 matrix? Oh, sorry, 3x3 matrix um, of performance, and a series of other sort of things, so that when it came time to sort of work out, pay grades and so on, you can actually sort of properly put them in a rank where the best performers obviously are the ones that you want to keep, and you want to nurture and develop and help and motivate and so on. And then you could have a proper picture of what's going on. And a lot of times, a lot of the people who work very hard, who've been there for a long time and quietly, they're happy doing what they do, but they work very well and happily. Those are the ones that get forgotten. And in those cases, that kind of matrix helps not only recognize them, but also say, like, look, we see you, we know that you're doing a good job. You're not the superstar, but you're not the underperformer. You're there right in the middle where we want you and where you're happy being, but we want to acknowledge this and we want to sort of reward it too. And it's a very difficult thing to do, but it's surprisingly easy when you've got the data and you're willing to sort of spend a little bit of time sort of just looking at that data. And we developed that just to avoid, because 100 plus people is very difficult to manage that kind of thing. And we did it in order to make sure that it was always equitable. And we're quite sort of open and honest about how we did it, so that people didn't think that, managers were favoring the shiny superstar of the week. But it was kind of a proper conversation. And here, evaluations is not about once a year evaluations, it's constant communication between the manager and each one of the individuals in that group. Doesn't matter if it's one or two notches down, but that manager needs to very well understand where that person in each group is on a developmental side of things, on how they're working, if they've got any problems at home, or if they've got any issues or concerns and so on, and just to try and make sure that they're working on this. Because if the concerns of the people working in your team are not being addressed, those people are going to leave. And I've always understood that people leave bad managers, not bad companies. And managers need to be able to understand their team. And if they don't understand their team, they shouldn't be a manager.
Oof. You take me down a path there, trust me. But I 100% agree with that. And there are a lot of instances where you see that playing out. You see the favoritism playing out. In fact, you see people being rewarded into managerial positions because that's the only way you can actually get a position. You can also get promotion. And there's some people who do not want to be managers. They prefer to be ICs or they want their thing. But it's like, well, if you want to get up and get ahead, we're going to give you a team. I don't want a team, but that's the only way to do it. So there's so many different things that kind of play out there. But there's some really good points, and the way you approached it, even the openness around here's how we're doing things. I think that in itself speaks to trust. And that helps people to know that this is actually a fair system, not based on preferences or relationships, but actually we have an equitable system, and that can make such a key difference. And you operated, especially in Formula One, where pressure is constant. And I'm curious, how do you, in pressurized environments like that, how much do you introduce conflict into spaces like that? Because there's a difference in good conflict, healthy conflict, and destructive conflict. Conflict is needed to kind of get the best out of people. But then I'm thinking, if conflict is good or bad, but then you also have a lot of pressure, like you're operating in, do all those two elements even mix at all? Or do you recognize in those environments, actually the pressure is enough and therefore we don't need to add any more conflict into the mix?
I don't. I mean, in my case, I don't think you ever want to have conflict because if you have good professional teams and they understand that, especially if you've got a place where the words psychological safety are absolute paramount, and this is a very, very big thing for me, is that if you have a team of very high performing people and engineers who are very intelligent and they're all comfortable that they can raise their hand and it doesn't matter what they say, people are going to go, yeah, okay, I hear you, but I think the collective thing is that, yeah, we hear you, but I think this is better. But everybody has a voice, and we you know, in F1, like in a lot of other elite sort of businesses and sports, you don't really have the time for petty things. So politics, you try and get rid of all politics. So that's one of the major jobs of the top hierarchy, is to stop any nonsense coming into the environment. Try and get away from anything that's distracting, anything that's stopping people from doing their work. So when it comes to conflict, you have a lot of problems to solve every day. You know, the car's broken down on the track and we've lost the race because of X. You want to try and fix that as quickly as possible. So you have to try and get a bunch of very talented people who are obviously quite emotionally charged. The fact that, you know, we've just missed out on a bunch of points in the last race because X, Y, and Z happened. But ultimately, you're trying to find a solution to a problem. So you get a lot of intelligent people in an office or in a meeting room, and you start discussing the point, and then you try and work out what the solution is without any kind of conflict. You just lay out the problem. Anybody got any thoughts and ideas? Have we thought about this? And you start working out the like root cause analysis, Ishigawa, the fishbone diagram, and all that, all until you try and sort of pin down where the problems are. But it's always in an environment of respect, of trust. Trust is the biggest one. Of, you know, I hear you. What's the collective thought about this? But also in the fact that, you know, a young engineer could have a solution, and if everybody agrees in that room that that's the solution, if that fails flat on its face, it's not that. I mean, the engineer will put up their hand immediately and say, like, yeah, that was my responsibility. But everybody around them says, like, that's our collective responsibility, because the chief designer or the technical director or the head of department or that should have seen that and should have stopped it if they knew that was the outcome. Some cases, just you try things, they don't work, because in our case, we're literally working on the absolute edge of physics, chemistry, in some cases, technical, all these sort of things. So sometimes it'll go, hopefully, our way, but sometimes it'll go the other way. So you always acknowledge that fact. So when it comes to conflict, you certainly try not to. And I once saw, it is probably one of the best examples of high pressure problem solving, is that there was the middle of the test before the season starts, and the car goes up, something rather bad happens, and the car comes straight back in, major problem. And I'm looking around. This is many years ago when I first started, not in my current job. I looked around, nothing's going on, and then I started to see 2 or 3 of the senior people go out. They congregate around a desk, 20 minutes, chat. No problem. Okay, they'll go off for lunch. And that was it. They quietly saw the problem, discussed the problem, checked it out, said, right, this is more or less the beginning of the problem. This is what we're going to do about it. Everybody happy? Right, we'll meet up again later on this afternoon. No running out of the office, shouting, head on fire, sort of shouting at people, saying it's your fault. No, that's not the way to solve things. It's a bit like the analogy of the airliner. If the engine's on fire, you suddenly see the captain running down the corridor, shouting and screaming. You're going to like, oh dear, this is not looking good. Whereas if the captain's sounding very cool, calm and collected, saying like, passengers, look, we've got a problem, but we're going to get the aircraft down to the ground and calmly. Everybody goes, oh, that's okay. Yeah, I trust the captain. So it's the same thing. Conflict, certainly in our case, is not a particularly good thing. You have to have tension, You have to have pressure, but conflict is not. I don't think it would be the word I'd want.
I like that. I like the tension. I think tension is a much better word because that's for me goes back to that whole adage of like iron sharpens iron. Whereas how do you get the best out of people so not everyone's just agreeing with each other, but you're bringing new ideas. And you talked about having that psychological safety to do so, regardless what level you are. And those are the things that can help improve. Like I said, you're on the cutting edge of things. So if you're on the cutting edge of things, you are constantly experimenting. You constantly have to be curious, and therefore you need to be in an environment where you can lean into saying the thing and doing that, which is good. And how do you deal with disappointment? How do you deal with days when, like you said, things haven't gone well on the track, or something's happened with a team and it's like, oh, we did that and it's our fault. And how do you deal with that disappointment?
Um, it's a it's a very difficult thing, but the everybody's there because they want to win. They want to be the best. And there's only 10. Next year, there'll be 11 teams. And it doesn't happen in every team, but certainly in our case, we do communicate quite a lot in the good and the bad. And in the bad, get everybody together, go like, right, this is what happened last race. This is what we're doing about it. Or we did really well, guys. Little glass of bubbles, and we got a podium or whatever. But you try and always share, communicate. Everybody in the company is as important as each other. So therefore, it's a team. It's a team effort. When the something that sort of also to the point of one of the points early on about trust and so on, is that in F1, for example, everything's about the driver. You watch a telly, it's all about the drivers and so on. It's all they're the stars. As soon as the drivers come into the factory, they're treated as just another employee. Nobody makes a fuss about them. They walk around and they're chatting to people. You can be literally in the canteen queue chatting with one of the drivers, and it's no big deal. You're just talking to them as another employee, and they're talking to you, and so on. And the reason for that is because they know that they're one out of 1,000 people. And yes, there might be the pointy, the sharp edge, the people who actually get the car across the finish line, but ultimately it's the car that the 1,000 people give them to get that, which is what gets them across the line. So it's when it comes to sort of disappointment, yeah, obviously have to manage it, but you're in a sport where you know that it's the tiniest little fractions of we're talking marginal gains to the nth degree here, and everybody needs to know that there will be disappointment. There will be, not every race will be a winning race. There can only be one winner in every race, and one winner every year. So most people will be disappointed, but it's about trying to manage that to say, like, right, this is our plan of how we're going to become better and better and better. And a lot of the time, it's not so much about building towards that winning podium. Of course, that's the culmination of, but it's the journey of how you get there. That's what you'll remember in life, is how did I get there? That was the fun bit. And as a manager, that's a bit that is always forgotten, is that you have to try and make sure that journey is fun, because when people will remember it, in years to come, they will probably not remember so much that, the fact that they celebrated the win or whatever, but it was the fact that they had a group of people that they trusted and they got on well with, and they were almost like their family. If it's done correctly, that's what they'll remember.
So that quote, people remember how you made them feel, how important that is, which is true. And I just want to, so I've been looking forward to this, and this came at such a right time because I want to get your take on operational versus strategy. So I'm seeing a lot of leaders reacting what I'm going to call operationally, especially to changing in tech, i.e. AI. They're chasing speed, efficiency, and quick wins instead of kind of slowing down to think a lot more strategically, whereas I'm more at long-term integration, culture, ethics, competitive edge, different things like that. And you've talked about in F1, things come down to milliseconds. You talked about how there's that tension between operational urgency, I guess, and strategic foresight, and that's even more visible. So how do you fight that urge to be more, I guess, operational? And or when do you know when to lean into more operational and strategic and vice versa? How do you actually manage that? Because that's something I think a lot of people are able to learn from.
I think here's where the if we're talking sort of in a general sense, you have to have a very clear understanding of what the vision is for the company, and that has to cascade through a strategy that is not just the big boss saying that we're going to be the best in 3 years time, and it's kind of like a vague strategy that kind of like say a bit of a on a wing and a prayer. It's the fact that that strategy has to be conveyed, has to be believable, understandable, achievable, such that everybody who it's conveyed to can understand it, feel part of that journey, feel part of that whole thing. But then all decisions, all objectives has to cascade down from that. And that's one of the things that a lot of companies don't do, is cascade objectives properly. You have a strategy, and if your individual objectives don't have a direct relationship to that strategy at the top, then it's a fairly useless objective, really. It doesn't add anything to it. But then operationally, you have to be slightly careful as what you do. Are the decisions I'm making contributing to that strategy? But also you have your immediate problems now, your medium-term ones, and your long-term strategy ones. So in our case, for example, you constantly have the fight of resources between, next week's race, the mid-season sort of upgrades, and the end of season sort of this and that, next year's car, which already started like 10 months before or whatever. And then also what are we doing about 2 years' time when the regulations are changing or whatever? For example, next year we're changing big time regulations, so we've been working on the car for quite a while. But it's constantly that battle to make sure that you don't use all of your resources now, and suddenly find yourself that next year's car, you haven't got enough resources to put all the things that you wanted to in that car anyway. And it's not something in this sport. It's not something that you can just say, "Oh, sorry guys, we didn't make it to the first test. Can you just delay that test a little bit?" No, you can't. No. So it's having the clarity of what resources, a plan that's not just 6 months ahead, but it's 3 years ahead, to say what resources am I going to need over that time? Have I got enough to cover all of that? Have I got the forward thinking? Are we allocating it properly? And in this case, having a good PMO team helps a lot, because then that can give you the whole picture. And if you can align resources management, the picture against the strategy, then that's always a good place to start. Because one problem is that you can end up painting yourself into a corner by chasing something, and then finding yourself that literally next year's car, you've just compromised the whole year because you've just robbed all of next year's car resources to just solve a problem that would be one race worth of a few more points. And that's a constant sort of vision of how we contribute to that top strategy that you have to keep an eye on.
Seems to have that alignment all the way throughout, but I guess that communication all the way throughout also has to be on point, so that everyone is aligned to that strategy, to that vision. And I guess a majority of your role will also be to help people to, for want of a better word, I'm going to call it filter out the noise. There might be something good and shining that's out there, but as a leader, that this is not aligned to where we're going. So rather than chasing that, let's stay focused. Yes, it looks good, but let's stay focused, or let's stay locked in, which is not the easiest thing to do, I guess. But I guess that's why you say the role of a leader it's not easy at all.
Never. No, it's not. No. Leadership is being able to set a path, being able to lead from the front, not tell people what to do, is to help develop people who can replace you, is have the courage to be able to forge ahead with a decision based on on the collective wisdom of your team, have being brave enough to be able to listen to everybody and then make that decision. Being humble enough to understand that you're not the fountain of all knowledge. And I think Steve Jobs of Apple fame said it correctly. Said, like, we hire people to give us the solutions, not to tell them what to do. But leadership is a very difficult thing. It's not always innate, and some people are lucky they're born sort of with certain traits of leadership, but in other cases, as myself, we've had to learn it the hard way. But it's, in my case, I've always understood that I like to help develop an area where people feel comfortable, people feel happy. You give them you empower people, you motivate them, and if you can do those two things and reward them properly, then you will be having a good team with you there, a good loyal team that will not want to leave you. And I've seen that firsthand. Is that if you have those ingredients in place, you will have a good team. It's when and also you have to have stability. Stability in leadership is very important, as we've seen in not only F1 but also in many other areas. If people are nervous to go to a company that where the leadership is a little bit is never quite there understood, because then every new leader wants to bring their new strategy, and then you start having this sort of like, yeah, we've heard that strategy before, that didn't work last time or the time before, or okay, here we are. And I think, leadership has to be given the time to be able to do things, put things in place in order to be able to create their own high performance team. But ultimately, it's all about trust and people and empowerment.
When your team members look back years from now, what do you hope they will say about the experience of being led by you?
Hopefully that I was trying to help develop them as a team member, as a young leader. I was giving them opportunity to be able to organize themselves better, to take a step back, especially the managers take a step back and lead more strategically rather than just putting fires out all the time. That they now understand empowerment, motivation, how to give back power to the team itself, to say, look, you, the team, are the ones who understand better how to be happy in your own work environment, and also hopefully having opened up opportunities for them, because ultimately one of the things that leaders nowadays, something very counterintuitive, that you become a leader and you want to protect that space because it's yours and you don't want anybody jumping on it or over me, and ultimately, as a leader, the most important thing you have to do is develop your own replacement. And what do I mean by that? Because if you're good enough at your job, you'll be able to you'll be able to make sure that your team works well, but also that you have a replacement for you, because if you're good enough, you're going to be promoted out of that place. And you want to make sure that the person who replaces you is ready to do that. And that's something that we put in place is succession planning. Everybody had, all the managers all the way down had to have somebody that they were mentoring to potentially take over their job. So if somebody fell under a bus or was taken off to another team or resigned or whatever, then that person, at least we knew that there was somebody in place, planned, such that they could be replaced. Because one of the big problems of that company, that they don't do this, and then one of the biggest frustrations in the team is that if manager X suddenly leaves or whatever, or something happens, then the team goes like, I'm ready to, and then they go, oh yeah, there's nobody then in the team that can take over that place. Oh, we're going to have to recruit outside. And that immediately demotivates everybody else. And then they reach in for LinkedIn And before you know it, it's like your best people are being poached to go elsewhere. Whereas if you have that whole thing about succession planning, and you go like, okay, that person's left, right? It's between you and you and you. Okay, let's have a talk about it. See who's the best, and then at least people go like, yeah, I was given a chance. Okay, it didn't work this time, but I'm being developed to do that. And having a clear idea of giving people a development plan. This is absolutely super important. If everybody has a development plan and they know where their career is going to go places, and the onus is on them to be able to develop their career, then they will be loyal to that team. And I've seen that absolutely firsthand. Development plans work like magic.
There's something around just listening to your story from growing up to feeding your curiosity to you working on yourself, and then that thread from um Army to so from the Navy to corporate to aerospace to there to Formula One and doing the thing you're doing. That is all around. You are consistently looking at how can I make other people in my environment level up. And the more I can do that, the more I personally learn, the more I personally grow. And that for me speaks to what I've just been able to, so many other gems, but what I've been able to get, like the power of what it takes to really lead is around being curious, starting with yourself, because like I said right at the start, you were challenging yourself and growing through that. Experiences came your way, but you stepped into them. But then as you challenge yourself, you then challenge your environment, which then includes other people in that space. And that's such a powerful thing. And when you think about a lot of what you described around build high performing teams, psychological safety, empowerment, tension in spaces, but not conflict, all the different, there's so many things that so many people can learn how to apply in both their businesses, in their corporate lives, but also in their personal lives, because it makes a massive difference when you start to think about it. So thank you very much for just coming on and sharing. I know that so many people listening to this to take so much stuff from your journey to apply them to their day-to-day lives. So really, really appreciate you. Where can people get hold of you? Where can people book you, get you into their companies to come and share some of your stories? Because there's so many things we didn't want to get into there about your corporate experience, which is also there and also has so much depth into that as well. So where can people find more about you?
Yeah, thanks for that. It's very kind of your words. Yeah, it's an area where I love sort of going into companies and doing talks like this, because it's I think some very powerful messages to be given there, and the more that we can spread the word, the better. I'm seem to be currently doing a lot more of this, so people can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm sure that we can put a link on the podcast, and otherwise it's shepherd.sebastian at gmail.com. So hopefully looking forward to being able to contact with other people.
All that information will be available in the show notes of how to get a hold of Sebastian and to work with him, which I highly, highly encourage. This is Everyday Leadership. We will see you all next week.